All right, I'm going to do a quick run through of this deck. It won't be super in depth, but I think it should hopefully be helpful. So, just straight from left to right, we've got 20 lands. I realize it looks a little bit low, but I do think it's correct, and I do think it's right to stop at Landmore Waste as the only non basic. City of Brass and Darragaz's Caldera I have tried, but they're drawbacks which are pretty apparent. Just they're just too weighty to be worth including, I think. Moving on, we've got a bunch of obvious stuff in the one slot. Quarian Ranger may seem a bit questionable, but it really helps with me getting away with 20 lands, and it's a really awesome survival toolbox card. Like, a lot of the time, you can just fit it into your turn of survival activity without costing any net mana. So fits in really nicely and has, you know, great applications against stuff like Armageddon and Stasis and whatnot. Moving on, we've got some obvious stuff at the top. Withered Wretch is it's a metagame call. I figure there's enough graveyard stuff going on, and it has the added bonus of pairing with Graveworm Muse as a second zombie. Next, we've got Mesmeric Fiend. That is not as good as Therapy and Duress, obviously, but being able to get with Survival is pretty nice. Tempting Worm is a bit of a weird one. It does have what on its face appears to be a very severe drawback, but having a 5/5 for 2 when you want it, I think is very much worthwhile. Next, we've got only 3 Wall of Roots, whereas for a long time I ran 4 of them. However, I do think 3 is enough, and as much as I'd love to have 4, it's just a really crowded deck. Moving on to the 3s then, Hypnotic Spectre is maybe a bit non-standard. It fills the role of being a 3 casting cost grindy value card, and sometimes that's just what you want when you're ramping up. And additionally, you can play it on turn 2 off of Birds of Paradise, which is not as good as Dark Ritual on turn 1, but still not bad. Next, we've got Octavia Rainatane, which for a long time I didn't run the main, but due to the deck's weaknesses against stuff like, I mean, really, enemy number 1 is Phyrexian Dreadnought, but there's, I think, enough stuff just going on to justify it. Next, we have Yavimaya Elder. It, just like Quarian Ranger, helps me get away with 20 lands. I think that it's absolutely worthwhile. 1 seems like the right number, though I couldn't fault someone for playing 2. And yeah, the stuff north of that appears to be, not exactly in need of explanation. On to the 4s then. We have Braids. Braids, I know, it doesn't see a lot of play in the format, and it doesn't appear to be very powerful on its face, but in my experience, just like Tempting Worm, there are situations where it's fantastic, and it's simply worth the slot to have it in those at those times. And additionally, even if you just draw it naturally and you don't have, your choice of creatures with survival, we've got Wall of Blossoms, Wall of Roots, Elder, Rainatane, Squee, Shredder, Hermit. It generally fits into the deck very well in terms of synergy. Next, we've got Graveworm Muse. It's a pretty straightforward card. Gives you value, costs 4, pairs with Withered Wretch when needed. And yeah, just like Braids, it can be pretty good even if you just sort of happen to draw it in a game missing survival. It just has enough raw power to carry those sorts of games itself sometimes. Next, we've got Vigilante, which is frankly just a bad card, but you have to be able to kill enchantments. So there it is. And Masticore, which is just you know, pretty standard for survival. Got to have one on hand when you need it. And finally, Deranged Hermit. I could see how people might be inclined to play 1, but I do think that 2 is justified. First for its raw power, which is pretty considerable. Next for its recurring nightmare synergy. And also because it does have increasing marginal returns, meaning that your first Hermit may be good, but your second Hermit is even more high impact than the first. So that's a pretty good summary of the main deck, I would think. Moving on to the sideboard, I've got a second Wretch, just a metagame call. Lots of decks where you want it, like Terrageddon, Replenish, have 4 Swords to Plowshares, so it helps to have 2 of it. Bone Shredder, I know from experience, is definitely justified. Sometimes you just want to have a second instead of needing to recur it. Plague is pretty obvious. Butcher is a real niche card. Helps with a lot of stuff that Shredder can't hit. For example, I mean, a lot of stuff that this deck actually has itself. Withered Wretch, big problem. Hypnotic Spectre, Greyborn Muse. You have to get rid of this stuff somehow. And additionally, it's nice when they, you know, like Meddling Mage or Shredder or whatever. Moving on to the green stuff. We've got Naturalize at a 4 of. It may seem a bit high, but I think that right now it's justified, though you could dial it down if you feel like your metagame justifies it. Spike Feeder, pretty straightforward anti-mono red card. We've got Genesis. It's in the sideboard rather than the main because there are a lot of matchups where you just don't want it. And furthermore, the deck is it's really complicated and it doesn't win fast. So running out of time is a very real threat. And with all that considered, I think the home for Genesis is absolutely in the board rather than the main. And finally, Tempting Worm. It's you know, sometimes you just want more of it. What's nice is that when you play multiples, I mean, you pay the cost up front. When you pay your second worm, there's no additional cost really, because I mean, you've already let them dump their hand, so why not make some more? But yeah, it's great against you know, mono red, of course, but you know, like aggressive black decks, the Rack, it's great there, and also decks that try to choke you out on mana. Sometimes I'll find myself just boarding out Deranged Hermit, but still wanting offensive power, and Tempting Worm sort of fits that bill. So yeah, that's you know, not super detailed, but I think it's a fair summary of what's going on here. So hope you found it helpful, and yeah, if you want to try the deck out, you know, always glad to see more of it out there.